He really despised Humphrey Bogart more than anyone else. On December 25, 1899, Humphrey Bogart was born Humphrey Deorest Bogart. In New York City on the December 25, 1899. Bogart came from a milieu far different from the tough characters that would eventually define him. His father was a well-known surgeon and his mother was a talented commercial illustrator. This meant that he grew up in a privileged but emotionally isolated way. That emotional reserve would eventually become one of his most potent cinematic attributes, giving characters that didn't say much yet spoke everything: depth, restraint, and authenticity. Discipline and high expectations were a big part of Bogart's early existence. He went to private schools, such Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, to prepare him for a good job, but because he couldn't sit still and didn't care about following the rules in school, he chose a different path. After a short time in the U.S. Navy during World War I, which is said to have left him with a scar on his top lip, Bogart came back home not knowing what to do with his life but determined to make his own name. He started acting on stage in the early 1920s. Broadway was where he learned how to be a better actor. He worked hard for years, had some successes and failures, and was always short on money. These first few years were not at all glamorous. Bogart went through failed productions, few roles, and extended periods of not knowing what would happen next. But this time made him stronger and helped him grasp character, conversation, and timing better. Bogart wasn't made suddenly like a lot of stars. He was made steadily through hard work and experience. Hollywood didn't see his talent right away. During the 1930s, Bogart was typically cast as a supporting character, playing gangsters, crooks, and people with unclear morals. Even though these parts didn't always put him at the center of the tale, they showed how well he could show intelligence, danger, and emotional depth. In 1936, he had his big break with The Petrified Forest when he played the cruel Duke Monty. This got the industry's attention. This part was the first step in his change from a supporting actor to a starring guy. The 1940s were the most important decade in Bogart's career. He was in a lot of famous films at this time, which made him one of the best actors in movie history. High Sierra, The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, and Have Not are some of these films. The Big Sleep and Kyrgo showed how he could play a cynical detective, a reluctant hero, and a sentimental idealist. Bogart made the gruff, world-weary man with a strong moral center look ideal. Someone who could work behind the scenes but stood for loyalty, honesty, and quiet bravery. Humphrey may not have played a better role than this one. Rick Blaine in Casablanca, 1942, is the best role for Bogart. Bogart played a jaded nightclub owner who finds his principles again through love and sacrifice. His portrayal was full of emotional depth and restraint. His performance showed the struggle between personal desire and moral duty, making Rick one of the most memorable characters in movie history. The movie itself became a cultural icon, and Bogart's performance is still a masterpiece in how to act without being too loud. People who knew Bogart off-screen said he was very smart, funny, and independent. He turned down the Hollywood studio system's attempts to restrict him and became one of the first big actors to openly fight against unfair contracts and creative limits. He was one of the first members of the Committee for the First Amendment. He briefly spoke out against political bullying in Hollywood, showing that he was willing to protect his own freedom even if it meant risking his job. Bogart kept giving great performances in his later years, including the one that won him an Academy Award for The African Queen in 1951. The part showed a funnier, lighter side of his abilities while yet keeping the roughness and realism that fans appreciated. It was the crowning triumph of his long journey from being an unknown character actor to being a famous movie star. Humphrey Bogart's love life was just as dramatic, intense, and difficult as the ones he played on television. Before he became a famous actor in Hollywood, Bogart's troubled marriage showed how restless, emotional, and ever-changing his search for love was. Bogart married actress Helen Mean on May 20, 1926, after dating for 4 years. This was his first marriage. At that time, both were young, ambitious actors trying to make it in the tough world of theater. But their relationship didn't last long. Creative stress, personality conflicts, and the stress of their jobs quickly took their toll. Not even a year later, on November 18, 1927, the marriage terminated in divorce. This was the first of many rocky times in Bogart's love life. Bogart didn't give up and found love again. He married actress Mary Phillips on April 3, 1928. but geography and ambition got in the way of their connection. As Bogart's career took him west to Hollywood, Phillips stayed firmly in New York, where she was already doing well on stage. She wouldn't give up her job, which made them feel more and more distant from each other. The marriage lasted 10 years, but it slowly fell apart since they were living apart and going in different directions. They broke up in 1938, but surprisingly, the breakup was friendly and the two stayed friends, which shows that they still respected each other even after love had faded. On August 21, 1938, Bogart married actress Mayo Method, which turned out to be one of the most unstable partnerships of his life. Their marriage was very passionate, volatile, and known for being very explosive. Method, who was insecure and sure that Bogart was cheating on him, often got into fights with him that were nasty and sometimes physical. Their fights became so famous in Hollywood that friends gave them the nickname the Battling Bogarts. At first, passion brought them together, but in the end, it tore them apart. Their divorce in 1945 ended one of the most renowned marriages in classic Hollywood history. It was the result of years of emotional turmoil. On May 21, 1945, Humphrey Bogart married Lauren Beale. This would be the most important love story of his life. The affair started on the set of To Have and Have Not, when the intense connection between the elder actor and the very young newcomer shocked Hollywood insiders and thrilled moviegoers. Their marriage lasted until Bogart died in 1957. Even though there was a big age difference, Beale brought stability, respect, and a lot of love into his life, things he had been looking for a long time but had never truly found. They were one of the most famous couples in movie history and had 2 kids, Stephen Humphrey Bogart and Leslie Bogart. It was never hard for Humphrey Bogart to show how he felt. In an industry where people fake politeness and grin at each other, Bogart was different because he prized honesty above all else. He liked people who were tough, loyal, and professional, and he didn't have much patience for anyone he thought were fake, opportunistic, or riding on someone else's coattails. During his long and famous career, Bogart had problems with a lot of people, but people who knew him well often stated that one individual stood out from the rest. Joey Bishop. By the time Bogart became a well-known actor, he had worked hard to get his name out there. He played minor, thankless parts for years until ultimately making it big in High Sierra and The Maltese Falcon. Those problems changed the way he saw the world. Bogart thought that you had to earn respect, not ask for it. As he previously said, "I didn't wake up a star one morning. I paid my dues, and I expect other people to do the same." That idea was really important to why he didn't like Bishop. Joey Bishop, who was a comedian and then a member of Frank Sinatra's Rat Pack, was everything Bogart hated about the Hollywood social scene in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Bishop was funny, sharp-tongued, and smart, but Bogart thought he wasn't deep or honest enough. Bogart thought that Bishop was a man who thrived on sarcasm and being close to strong friends instead of making real contributions to art. He talks fast, makes jokes even faster, and doesn't say anything. Bogart once said plainly, "That's not talent. That's noise." People say that their hatred for each other came from social events where Bishop's jokes breached borders that Bogart thought were wrong. Bogart didn't mind jokes, but he hated what he thought were cheap shots and arrogant cleverness. People who were there at the time said that Bishop would make cruel comments while seeming to be funny, usually about people he thought couldn't or wouldn't fight back. Bogart, who was proud of standing up for people, thought this was cowardly. Bogart observed, "A man who hides behind jokes isn't funny. He doesn't want to say what he means." Bishop's friendship with the Rat Pack, especially Frank Sinatra, was another source of stress. Bogart and Sinatra used to be good friends, but their friendship faded over time, especially after Sinatra started hanging out with a younger, flashier crew in Hollywood. In Bogart's mind, Bishop was a sign of that change. Bogart said that Hollywood used to be about making films. Now it's all about who can talk the loudest at the table. He thought Bishop was the best example of such transformation. Bogart's hate was not fake or for show. It was frigid and never changed. His animosity for Bishop never went away. Unlike other fights that came and went, he wouldn't talk to him and is said to have left rooms when Bishop came in. Bogart answered honestly when asked why he felt so strongly. "I don't like people I don't trust, and I don't trust him." As Bogart got older and more disillusioned with Hollywood, loyalty and honesty were very important to him. His marriage to Lauren Beale, his political activism, and his reluctance to play The studio publicity game all showed that he was a man who wanted to stay true to himself in an industry that rewarded people who followed the rules. Joey Bishop's sharp wit and ability to get along with people were very different from that way of thinking. In the end, Bogart's dislike of Joey Bishop says more about Bogart than it does about Bishop. It shows how serious the actor was about being real and how much he hated what he saw as fake. Bogart had a simple set of rules that he expected everyone to follow. If you broke them, you probably wouldn't get his forgiveness. You don't have to like everyone, Bogart once said, but you should know why you don't, and I always do. That unwavering moral compass and assurance are what made Humphrey Bogart a lasting figure. He was flawed, headstrong, and sometimes unforgiving, but he was always honest about who he was and what he believed. And when it came to Joey Bishop, he never changed his mind. As Humphrey Bogart's amazing life came to a conclusion, he faced one last fight that was just as tough as any of the tough parts that made him famous. Bogart had been a strong smoker and drinker for most of his life. He started to have constant pain and trouble swallowing. His body was issuing quiet signals long before the truth became too clear to ignore. He was typically stubborn and fiercely private, so he ignored these symptoms and refused to consult a doctor, sure that they would go away on their own. The diagnosis was terrible by the time he eventually saw doctors in January 1956. Cancer of the esophagus was already progressed and aggressive. The timing couldn't have been worse. There weren't many medical choices, and the disease had gotten worse than it could be treated with surgery or successful treatment. In a last-ditch effort to halt the cancer, Bogart had a major surgery, but the harm had already been done. The once important actor, known for his cutting wit, steely eyes, and unbreakable screen presence, started to deteriorate physically, losing weight quickly and getting weaker every day. Friends and co-workers who saw him were astonished by how weak he had become. This was a shocking change from the strong, impenetrable image he had portrayed for decades. Through it all, Bogart faced his decline with grim determination and moments of the dark humor that had always been a part of his personality. His dedicated wife, Lauren Beale, stayed by his side, giving him courage and comfort as he went through months of pain, mostly out of the public eye. Hollywood, which had so often hailed his successes, was sad to see one of its biggest stars go. Humphrey Bogart died of esophageal cancer on January 14, 1957, at the age of 57. His death shocked the film world and beyond. It ended a career that had changed American cinema. Even after he died, Bogart's legacy lived on in unforgettable performances, timeless films, and the image of a man who handled life and death on his own terms, both on and off the screen.